great compilation tape. Like breaking up is hard to do and takes ages longer than it might seem. You got to kick it off with a killer to grab attention. Then you got to take it up a notch. But you don't want to blow your wad, so then you got to cool it off a notch. There are a lot of rules.
12 albums, 1 cent. Find our ad in Sunday's paper. Take it to your mailbox. You'll get a lot more music. You'll get a lot more life. Look in your Sunday paper.
Welcome, listener. For those about to rock, we salute you. This is our podcast dedicated to exploring and talking about the greatness that was the music of the best decade. If you're ready for the best in retro music topics on the planet, we present for your enjoyment 80's Mixtape Auto Reverse.
Okay, it has been a couple of weeks and we are back and we are getting ready to go to 1987. We're getting closer to the end of the decade, and we're getting, the music has taken different steps and different branches, and there's just a lot to cover still. Every year it just keeps getting more interesting, I think. So 1987, we have a lot to talk about and try to get through a lot of it tonight. And let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. We have Chris. Say hello.
How you doing out there, folks?
And we have Tim again.
Good evening, welcome, and let's do some 1987. I was going to go first. Scott, you want to take it off?
Wow, you put me on the hot seat right away. All right, I can do this. I'm gonna go "Surfing with the Alien" by Joe Satriani. Okay, there's few things in life that I actually that cause me to run, and that's usually being chased by something. This was the only album that I could put on either my iPod or whatever music player I had going on. Actually, it wasn't an iPod back then; it was like a cassette player or maybe a CD, a CD Walkman, right? And because they were just starting to hit the market barely. Anyway, so the beat of his songs go perfectly with the pace that I like to run at. So this album was the only thing that actually makes me enjoy running. Other than that, I can't stand running. So, it's just I just love the guitar, how he makes the guitar sound like it's the vocals. You know what I mean? It's like it fills the vocal spots. And he sings with his guitar. It's amazing. And I love his sound. Pretty much every song on this album, I just absolutely love it. Crushing Day is just incredible. The solo that he does in that is amazing. Of course, you got Surfing with the Alien title track. It's awesome. Circles is another one of my favorites. Lords of Karma. Everything on this album, I just absolutely love it. So, what do you guys got?
Well, I love Joe Satriani, and this is, I think it's maybe his quintessential album. To me, it is anyway. But yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's when kind of the world sort of really found out who Joe Satriani was. Still probably his best album, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I'm not quite sure he really ever duplicated that afterward. Did great things, but also one of the coolest covers on a record with what mimicked or maybe is the Silver Surfer comic book character. Just very cool stuff all the way around, I think.
Yes, just awesome. Tim?
I guess I have some homework. I remember a couple of the songs, Surfing with the Alien, of course, and Wasn't Always With Me, Always With You, released as a single. For some reason, that one stands out to me. Yeah. Satch Boogie as well, but I don't own this. I've never owned it. I've never listened to the whole thing. But obviously, no one can deny Satriani was a master, and it's pretty awesome that it went platinum in the U.S. It is completely instrumental, right? I mean, there's no vocals at all.
No, there are some vocals, but
there are.
For the most of it, there's like I think there's like one, maybe two songs that have vocals. Maybe this one's the one with none. You know, you might be right. I think it's the next one. I think it's the next one that he releases, the Flying in a Blue Dream. That one's got vocals on it for sure. Maybe this one.
Yeah, this one. I don't remember. I mean, I don't remember every song, lick for lick, but I do not remember this particular one having any vocals on it.
Yeah, and it doesn't. No, it's just it doesn't list any vocals either. So
I think it's really cool that an instrument that would fall under the realm of heavy metal could go platinum. That's pretty cool. So definitely give him his props, and I will take this away and figure out some way to listen to it.
Yeah, it's a really good listen, Tim. I mean, it's really good. I think it's probably at when he was sort of at his most creative, in my sense. I think that knowing nothing about it, obviously can't say this is word for word, but I think putting vocals on the next album was kind of like, okay, I did the instrumental thing. Now let's see if I can do the instrumental and singing thing and make songs that can play better on the radio. And I really don't know if that ever worked well for him.
Yeah, there's one song on the next album. It's called Big Bad Moon. That's a pretty good song. That's got vocals on it. Anyway, yeah, I would recommend Crushing Day. It's amazing song. Also Circles and Lords of Karma. Those are a couple other. Oh, Echo is good too. Yeah, all of these are all really cool songs. I think you'll dig it. So who wants to go next? Do we want to go to the next album yet?
Tim, go right ahead, my friend.
All right. A couple of years ago, I mentioned Pretty Maids, and this was the year of their big album for me. It was called Future World, 87. They had a video on MTV. I remember being at home, and I used to tape the Headbangers Ball for, months worth, years worth of Heavy Metal Mania's Headbangers Ball, whatever. And I remember it was a Sunday morning, the ball was on Saturday, Sunday morning, I was buzzing through it, and this video came on, and it had this cool car, and I'm like, well, who are these guys, and that's when I found Pretty Maids, was because of the video for the title track off this, and I must have watched that video 100 times. I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever, because it had really cool interplay between the guitars and the keyboards. I like how they can play keyboards on this album and not have it be cheesy 80s keyboards. I mean, they actually play a role. They're not silly keyboard, and they're not just like, like maybe there were some Dio songs where there were just keyboard just kind of for the sake of having a little bit of a sound wash in the background. But I just love the way these guys could be heavy. They could be commercial, always melodic. Ronnie Atkins is a vocalist, has a lot of different voices he sings in, and it's just a great package. The cover art is awesome. And actually, this album directly led to me making like one of my best friends in my life at college. This guy came into my room and saw that I had the Pretty Maids cassette tape. He's like, "You like Pretty Maids too?" And it just, I'm still best friends with the guy decades later. So definitely this album has a special place in my heart, and it's great. It's solid heavy metal. A lot of typical lyrical stuff. There's some Cold War anti-nuke stuff. There's some Vietnam War stuff. There's songs about chicks. Just a lot of typical things. But to me, it's not just a cliche. Yet just another album from an 80s metal band. These guys are really, I think, something special. They're still active today. Never really hit it big in the U.S. unfortunately, but great. One of my favorite bands.
Chris,
well, this is my homework. This is my homework moment, because I have, quite honestly, I have never heard of this band. And I'm reading on them now, and they're Danish. Yeah, Danish. And Flemming Rasmussen had something to do with this band, Tim. So that's kind of cool. As a mixer, which is weird for him to just go down and do the mixing. He didn't engineer or anything like that. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I will have to do some homework on this one. You got me on this one.
The title track on this, Future World, is one of my all-time favorite metal songs. This thing just rocks, and it's really weird how you said that Ronnie Atkins sings in different voices, because he really does. I mean, it sounds like two different vocalists in the same song, and he changes it up in that song a few times, and it's really a cool song. But the intro guitar work is it grabbed my attention right away when I heard it. The first time I heard this song, I'm like, wow, that song really rocks. And the rest of the songs, yeah, I haven't visited this album in a long time, so I'm gonna have to go back and listen to some of the other ones. I kind of remember Needles in the Dark, and I think it was Eye of the Storm. That was another good one. So I'm gonna have to go back and do some more homework on this one too. But overall, it was really cool at the time, especially that title track. Title track is just rocking. Good time. So.
Yeah, no, this was their major label debut, and Chris, it is interesting that you're right. Fleming Rasmussen just mixed it, but it was produced by Eddie Kramer, who was kind of a big deal too. So they had some names behind. It showed because it sonically it's a good sounding album. It's definitely all the pieces were in place. Unfortunately, didn't translate into multi-bazillion sales and fame,
which is often the case. When you do, it's sometimes you'd think that, you got a couple of heavy hitters on this, but it obviously never translated to record sales for them, which I'll listen to them, obviously, because I do all the time when I don't know a particular band. But at this time, though, there was just so much that it was hard to weed through. And, the U.S. was kind of the place where all this sort of started. So being from out of the country, it would have been even 5 times harder to hit if you didn't just have huge, massive fame in Europe and a lot of radio and record company support in the U.S.
Yeah,
that's true. All right. Well,
that's a good pick. I'm glad you brought it up because it was something that I was going to consider bringing up too. It's a good one.
Good. So I stole one from you.
Notice I didn't bitch and moan about it as much as I usually do. Chris.
Well, going right to my wheelhouse for multiple reasons on this album, which ironically was not originals, but I'm going with the 598 EP, Garage Days Revisited from Metallica. And for a very heavy into Metallica fan, this was a much bigger deal than the fact that it was 5 cover songs and it was, only 5 songs and it was cheap and there was no originals or anything like that. But this was the verification of a continuation of Metallica, because up to this point, I don't know how many people were sure that the band would go on. I'm pretty much everybody thought it would in a sense, but there's always still that, could you get over, Cliff's death? Would it be a Led Zeppelin deal where, they're not going to go on? So this was a huge, huge album for me. And the songs are great too. I mean, the covers from Diamond Head and Holocaust and Misfits, and, it's great music and they play it great. And it does sound, in a sense, like they recorded it in a garage on like a 4-track. It has a little bit of grit and unproduced sound to it, but it was still playing some of the British heavy metal, like hardcore punk, which was kind of Lars Ulrich's wheelhouse as far as his music goes. But it was also verification they were going to go on, like I said. And then, Jay New Kid, who was credited on the actual CD, wasn't even credited as Jason Newsted. It was New Kid. So I just was an amazing kind of moment for a Metallica fan, because you're like, okay, they're going to go. They're going to go forward. And strangely enough, it charted. It was top 30, a 5-song EP. It was like a top 30 or top 40 chart position. Went platinum over a period of years. I don't think it went platinum on its initial release, but so that's my first one right there. I thought it was a huge record, and it also began a dynamic change for Metallica that would carry him, probably minus the next album, over the course of the next 10 years.
I don't know how they could. It would be hard to fail. Well, I guess some bands do it, but coming back off of Master of Puppets, I mean, everybody's going to buy this album, and especially since they're doing covers. I like the title. I think it's funny. Revisited. It's not just revisited, it's revisited. It's a little double there. I haven't listened to this album very often. I've heard it a couple of times. I never owned it. So I'm not as familiar with it as I am most of the other Metallica stuff. I don't know why. I guess it was just bad timing, and I just never really went back and checked it out. I mean, I know the Small Hours. I've heard that. Crash Course in Brain Surgery. I know I've heard that on. I think I've heard that on satellite radio, even. So anyway, Tim, what do you think of this one?
Oh, I like it a lot. This was actually the first Metallica release that I bought. I had heard Master of Puppets, and one of my buddies had it, and then this came out, and this, I actually went in and paid $5.98 for the cassette tape, probably at I don't know what store it was at. I'm trying to remember. The Flip Side. That was the name of the record store chain around here. Flip Side. Anyway, no. And the title, it's funny you mentioned that, Scott. The Re-Revisit actually means something, right? Because they did have, what was it? Chris, you probably know better than me, but there was a single or another EP, like really early on, where they had a couple of cover songs that they had sort of informally called Garage Days Revisited. Because, at the time, they were a band, they had releases out, and they put out a couple of covers and called it Garage Days Revisited to just sort of show that they used to play covers in their garage days, right? So now this thing was the revisited version because it was a bigger release. It was, the second covers thing they had done, whatever. But I always thought the title was kind of funny too, and because it doesn't just roll off the tongue, Usually you want a title that's catchy, but I think most people just call it Garage Days anyway. But it's a funny picture, and the songs are cool. And yeah, it definitely solidified the fact that Metallica was still around. And I don't know really anybody who ever heard it and didn't like it. So it was cool. Bands put out EPs back then, and it was interesting that you could go and do that. And they'd always say, "Oh, it's to satisfy our fans until the next album comes out," or something. That was a cliche a lot of bands used back then. But it meant something different for Metallica because they had to show that they were still going to carry on and continue to kick as much butt as they had previously. And they did a good job with it.
Yeah, they did do a great job. And you are right, they did have, actually, you're right about the first EP, Garage Days Revisited, but in Europe, not so much in the U.S., they released as many as 15 EPs in Europe that have a mixture of cover songs and things like that, which not a lot of them made it over. That was the Metallica black market, kind of, to get those from Europe. They released a lot of small EPs in Europe.
Yeah, I remember I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, I have a few of those on cassette tape, but, I don't have them right here in front of me to tell you the names or, but yeah, you're right. Now that's ringing a bell. Yes, that they were European. They might have been on like Music for Nations record label or something, but I did actually find a few of them in our regular, probably in the import section, but that's just too long ago for me to remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I want to say something real quick about the imports. I remember that was a huge thing to try to find imports, not just by Metallica, but just of a lot of the bands, because some of the imports they had songs or tracks on them that you couldn't get on the ones in the States. Like, wasn't Def Leppard's High and Dry, didn't that have Me and My Wine on it in Europe, but it didn't have it here or something like that? And then they re-released it, and they had it added. So I think it was always a fun little chase to try to track down those European or the imports from even Japan and stuff. Some of them with the Japanese writing or whatever kind of writing is on the front versus the standard English. When you were getting the vinyls, it was like the colored ones. You get the different colored ones too. That was kind of cool. So anyway, different topic. Vinyls, good pick. I think the name also is still Metallica being Metallica, with them kind of giving the finger basically to the industry, saying, look, we're not just going to conform to, the typical commercial way of doing things. This is it. This is how we rock. And this is how we roll. So it's a really interesting position that they took the year after such a huge hit like Master of Puppets. So anyway. All right.
Number 2 for you?
Yeah. All right, I think we're gonna have to talk about the elephant in the room, and I think that's.
Jeez.
Well, it's kind of topical right now because they're back out on tour and they are coming to Tampa, and that would be Guns N' Roses with Axl Rose, Duff, and Slash. And I think that's all from the original lineup, but they are coming to Tampa like in a month or two, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. No, I don't think I think they're coming to Orlando.
Are you sure? I thought I heard it was Tampa. Oh, it might be Orlando. Anyway, close enough. It's close enough for us to get to if we wanted to go. I don't know if I would want to go because I don't want to wait 3 hours for them to come on stage, and for Axl to throw a fit and run off stage, and that's what I would be afraid of if I was going to go to that show because that's his reputation. But it's really interesting. This album, when this thing hit the market, it was over the top with just excitement and it was different. They were taking things in a little bit different direction because Axl's voice was not your typical, not the cleaner. He didn't have the cleaner voice that a lot of the metal albums did. So, the whole album, I listened to part of it again today. It's been a while, and there's some good songs on it still. I still dig it, but sometimes I just can't stand listening to Guns N' Roses because of Axl's attitude. So. That's my second pick. What do you guys think?
I love this album. It's a classic for a reason. I mean, it's like, I don't listen to it all the time, but when I do pull it out, I'm amazed at how I can remember virtually all the lyrics to all the songs. And that just goes to show how much I listened to this back in the, I talked about the Live Like a Suicide EP in a prior episode. And, I missed that, right? So I didn't know about Guns N' Roses until I saw the video for Welcome to the Jungle on MTV. And I was like, wow, that's a cool song. And then our local Chicago metal station, WVVX, was playing, I think it had to have been It's So Easy. And, they said, oh, that's Guns N' Roses. And I thought, that can't be the same band. That sounds like they must have multiple lead singers. And I was convinced I must have read an interview in Hit Parader or something where, they listed off the names of the guys in the band, and I saw a picture of Slash, and I figured that must have been him singing It's So Easy because the vocals were so much deeper and different than Welcome to the Jungle. And then, of course, you get the album and read it, and it's Axl, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. He's very versatile, and, things would change over the years, the stories, the 3-hour delays for concerts and all that other stuff. But when this album first came out, it was just awesome. I don't know if I call it heavy metal per se, but it's really good, solid, hard rock. I like that the song structures aren't so predictable. There's little mini solos here and there. The lyrics are downright nasty in places. And, as a 16-year-old kid, I was still sort of young enough to giggle at stuff like that, but also getting a little older, and I could understand what some of the innuendo was actually about, and it made sense on a different level, and it was funny and dangerous and just cool, all wrapped up into one package. And sonically, it's great. The band cover art, which ended up being on the inside, the painting. Remember, there was controversy about that, so these guys definitely were courting controversy from the beginning, but it was real, and it definitely kicked some of the bands in the butt, that were out at this time to show that, hey, he's like a street level band that's young and hungry, and they're a little bit angry, and you better watch out for these guys.
Yeah, they weren't the typical pretty boys, that's for sure. They were coming from a different angle, and I'm looking at the list again of the songs, and I'm like, man, you got to wonder how many times "Sweet Child of Mine" has been done karaoke.
Probably too many.
Probably. No, I know. But I would say my favorite song on the album, other than "Welcome to the Jungle," I think that'll always be a classic for me. But "Rocket Queen" was a great freaking song. I love that song.
There's so many songs on here that are cool. I don't ever need to hear "Paradise City" or "Sweet Child of Mine" ever again, ever. But the rest of the album, there's so much cool stuff. And the funny thing was, there's a lot of cowbell on this album too. I love it. And one thing I noticed, I pulled it back out today just to give myself one last refresher on it. And the thing that made my jaw drop, and I have to mention this because we always like to talk about Spinal Tap, is when we're done with this podcast, I want everybody to go and listen to the first 10 seconds of My Michelle and tell me that's not the same eerie music as Spinal Tap's Stonehenge.
Really? Okay. I can do that. Chris, where are you on this one?
I think it was if not one of the top 2 selling metal albums of the 80s. I'm sure there's another album that might be brought up that's probably in that mix somewhere too, but it's fantastic. And it's beyond fantastic. It pretty much, they could maybe not do anything after this album and still gotten in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was that good musically, and it was that important musically. So I don't think there's any coincidence that a lot of the hair bands, with the makeup and the girls and the pink chiffon and all that other stuff sort of started to go away after this album sold like 10 million copies. Because if you look at, Motley Crue changed, Poison changed, a lot of this stuff started to kind of like their on-stage persona went to jeans and, like leather pants with it wasn't the pretty boy 85, 86 thing was starting to go away a little bit. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, maybe Guns N' Roses had something to do with that. The fact that they were stripped down, Slash had a top hat and a cigarette. That was his signature. But otherwise, there was no pretty boy in this band whatsoever, and the music wasn't pretty. It was about drugs. It was about street things in L.A. It was the dirty side of small hotel Hollywood Boulevard. It was heroin. It was a lot of things going on in this album, and I think it's one of the best albums ever made in any genre. It stands out today. Like Tim said, I have Izzy Stradlin on my Spotify, Izzy Stradlin and Juju Hounds, which is his album when he went solo. And I'm like, well, 87's coming up. Let me just put this on there so you'll listen to it. I haven't heard in a while. Like Tim, word for word, I knew the whole album all the way down, without skipping a beat. It was like I heard it 20 years ago, and I just remember it. If that's the kind of album that just sticks with you. But like you guys, I could not listen to Paradise City and Sweet Child of Mine. I could never hear that again. I think My Michelle is a great song. It's So Easy, Night Train. That's Out to Get Me. Like the beginning guitar intro to Out to Get Me. It's mind blowing, the musical work on here. And funny that I was reading, and it's something I didn't know, that Paul Stanley, Tim, was going to be pegged to do the production and sort of engineering on this, and he was going to make some changes, so they fired him before they could hire him. I did not.
I'd always heard that story because he wanted to branch out a little bit too, like Gene Simmons had been doing with his record company. And that actually started some bad blood, like legitimate bad blood between Paul Stanley and these guys for a while. Because there's another story many years later, like Slash. I don't know. He wanted some guitars, or he was going to try to get some free guitars from a company that Paul Stanley was endorsing, and Paul Stanley kind of like interfered with it and blocked Slash from getting the guitars. Stuff like that. It's just funny, but these guys definitely had an attitude, and they weren't afraid to annoy anyone.
That was a funny story that I didn't hear. I did hear the rumor that they had also asked Nikki Sixx to be an engineer and sort of involved in this album, and he turned them down because they were in the middle of recording Girls, Girls, Girls. So it's just, but top 5 metal album of all time, easily. Top 3 even, if you want to do that. But great album. Great album. Glad I put it on my Spotify to listen to it, because I kind of fell acquainted again with some of the songs that aren't the 3 popular ones, and just it's great. It's just great music.
Yep. So I'm glad we were able to talk about this, because I knew we had to. It's something, I think it's a pivotal moment for the genre, like you were saying. And it's something special, that's for sure.
Well, it would be neck and neck for the biggest album of this year.
Right.
So it had to be brought up at some point. There's 2 that went nuts, opposed to the other ones that were great or good or sold a lot. But there's 2 clearly in this year that went past any other spectrum. So, oh yeah, very cool. Timmy, you're up, I think.
Yeah, and I would almost say that there were 3 albums this year. I mean, I'm not going to bring up either one of the other 2 right now, because my number 2 pick is Sabotage. Sabotage is Hall of the Mountain King. This one is, to me, it's a personal classic because it sort of erased the memory of the previous one, Fight for the Rock, which in my opinion was not very good. And this one has what a lot of people consider probably the signature Sabotage song, which is the title track, Hall of the Mountain King. There's some killer instrumental stuff on here. They play around with, I'm not sure if I'm saying the guy's name right, Edvard Grieg's classical piece in the Hall of the Mountain King, in an instrumental called Prelude to Madness, which is it's just fun, and you want to air guitar and rock out to it. It just sticks in your head. 24 Hours Ago is just sort of like more of a brutal, heavy song, and then they have they have pretty passages. There's a song called Strange Wings, which is kind of commercial but yet heavy, and there's some awesome background vocals from another great singer, Ray Gillen, who would go on to join Badlands, and fortunately he died way too young, but fantastic cover art again for a teenager like me who was knee deep in Dungeons and Dragons as well as heavy metal. The cover of Savage's Hall of the Mountain King is about the coolest thing ever. There was a pretty neat video too for it. Everything kind of clicked for me. I love this album. After this, was when they started getting more into the rock opera vein, which they certainly did very well for themselves with that. But this Sabotage here on this album is the kind of Sabotage I love. It's not quite so overblown in the rock opera format. They were just a really good, solid, classy metal band on this album.
Now, when you had me do some homework previously, a couple years back, I think it was maybe 84, 85, for the other Sabotage album, and I thought it was really good. I saw this album as one of the choices, and I'm like, I have a feeling we're gonna talk about it. I did not listen to it though, and I do know Hall of Mountain King, and Prelude to Madness was like an intro to that, right? I mean, it went directly from. It was a long song, right? Okay. Yeah, I remember that, and his voice, that John Oliva.
Yep, Oliva.
That guy's voice was unbelievable in that song. I remember just the screaming at the top of his lungs. I mean, it's just incredible. Now I'm gonna have to go back and listen to some of these other ones again because I don't know if I've heard them. I may have heard them. So I know, Chris, you're gonna have a lot to say about this. So why don't you go ahead and take it on?
Well, yeah, this was this was kind of what brought the Tampa Bay area as far as heavy metal and music. I don't think it's any coincidence that there's a couple of bands that ended up forming in Tampa in this same year after this album was that you might hear of later on or they'd released albums later on anyway. But 24 Hours Ago is a great song. Legions is a great song. Hall of the Mountain King, which we kind of played a joke on with John Oliva. I think I said this before. We called it Hall of the Burger King. After Johnny Boy put on a couple of layers, we called it the Hall of the Burger King. It's great. I mean, it's just great. I think what I liked most about this album is, and unfortunately later, but this was very Chris Oliva influenced. I think he kind of came into his own as a musician on this. He had a great instrumental called Last Dawn. It's just a 1-minute instrumental. And I think this was sort of his stride in writing and arrangements, and just a great team that they were, the two brothers, John and Chris. And, for the Tampa Bay area, this was huge. This was a full on rock star band from the Tampa Bay area. So it was, and the great lineup. They also had, this is where Chris Caffrey started to show up in this album as a touring player who would later be a full member of the band. Ray Gillen did some backup vocals on this. Paul O'Neill was the producer, and Paul O'Neill had gone on to do some great things too. He had a whole career in production himself, and So this was kind of them in their heavy metal mountaintop. Because like Tim said, they kind of little went rock opera after this, but this is full on straight heavy metal, and it was really, really good. I've listened to this CD when it came out, or tape or whatever it was at that time. That was over and over again. Great album. I mean, so Scott, it would definitely behoove you to get Sabotage and listen to like the next 3 or 4 albums, because they're pretty darn good. I mean, they're pretty darn good.
I mean, I appreciate every song that I've heard. I like them musically. Like their sound is really cool. I gotta throw in, I love their nicknames, their stage names, the Grit, the Crunch, the Thunder, and the Cannons. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Liner notes, gotta love those liner notes.
Yeah, I'm just reading down the thing here. Yeah, the Thunder for the bass. That's just awesome. So
yeah,
fun stuff. I'm definitely gonna have to listen to more of them. Probably gonna download a few. Okay, so that was Tim. Chris, what's your next one?
Well, I'm going to go with something that I really liked. I really liked this album, and that's Girls, Girls, Girls from Motley Crue. To me, it probably wasn't their best album, front to back. I think there's some kind of throw-in songs on this particular one. But, man, they just seem like a lot of fun to hang around. Girls, Girls, Girls. It just did. It was fun music, and it was still heavy, but it wasn't necessarily dark. I mean, Wild Side lyrically was, but it was still kind of a groovy, fun song to listen to. Girls, Girls, Girls was just that. I mean, how many times did you want to replay that video and like, God, I'd just like to be there that night, whatever was going on, motorcycles on Hollywood Boulevard and strip clubs, and they just kind of changed into a fun band. Like they hit some sort of stride where they don't think they felt like they had to prove themselves so much, and they just did some really cool songs. I mean, Dancing on Glass, it's a dark song. It's about heroin, basically, but it's still a good song. All in the Name of Rock and Roll, great song. Terrible cover of Jailhouse Rock. I'm not even going to get into that one, but just thought it was a fun album. It was a great album. It sold. It was popular. It was all over MTV. It was all over the radio. Charted high, top 10, top 5, I'm sure. I'm not looking that up, but I think this was when they just kind of hit that stride of like, okay, we're pretty good at this, and we're going to strip off the makeup and stuff like that. We're going to put leather on, and we're just going to be a band. And they would slowly keep that progression later. I thought it was a great album. It was a lot of fun to listen to. And the videos made it funner, made it even more fun, just because it just seemed like all of a sudden, like, not devil worshiper guys, just kind of cool dudes on the strip that you want to have a beer with and go to a strip club.
Tim?
Yeah, I loved the two songs to me on this album, A Wild Side and Title Track. And yes, the video is fabulous. And I also remember pausing, freeze framing that video, I don't know how many times, to try to prove to myself that the one amazingly hot blonde stripper that's only shown for like 2 frames really is Heather Locklear.
Really?
Because there's one girl, because Tommy Lee was married to her at that time, don't forget. And there's one girl in that video that they only show for a split second, and I swear it's her. I have no proof, but I'm pretty sure it's her. But anyway, and I'm glad you mentioned the Jailhouse Rock cover, because I always kind of hated that. I'm glad again that someone backs me up on that, because it's just not very good, I don't think. But yeah, it's a more straightforward thing. It's way better than Theater of Pain. I think it definitely, even though that album sold a lot too, to me though, this album got them back on track. Still couldn't quite crack the 40-minute mark, but at least it was longer than some of their previous stuff. It starts to feel like a real album here. It's not just scraping together enough songs and then throwing a cover and call it a day. I mean, can't deny Wild Side, Girls, Girls, Girls are great songs. And yeah, I totally agree with the vibe. Yeah, I mean, you just look at them and they're just a party to be around every night, and yeah, like I say, every 16-year-old kid that I knew wanted to hang out with Motley Crue, just like you were saying, Chris.
Yeah, it was really it just seemed like they got fun all of a sudden, like they were just fun guys, and like you said, the first 2 songs on there, and there's a couple other good songs, but yeah, that Jailhouse Rock one to me just seemed like there was honestly no point in putting that on the album. I didn't see why. And it even worse, it just made Vince Neil seem like, God, this guy can't sing. And they just did a horrible, like he was out of breath, like he just ate a cheeseburger before he went on stage. It's just terrible. But otherwise, really cool. What do you got? What do you got on this one, Scott?
I gotta say, this is one of the best bounce back albums that I've ever heard. They really made a nice turnaround from Theater of Pain, because we ripped on Theater of Pain pretty hard on that when we covered that album, and this album definitely is a better production. And you're right about them, just look like they're having a good time and just out to party and do whatever, and they're not focusing on that image that they were trying to portray before, be it the Shout of the Devil image or the Theater of Pain image. I think they're just they're loosening up a little bit with how they look, and they're just kind of going with the flow, and they're rocking and they're out just, what all the guys want to do is hang out with lots of hot girls,
Yeah.
And the Girls video, there was a rumor of a video that was like unedited with a lot more skin exposure. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I'm sure.
I have it. I have a DVD collection of old music videos, and it is actually the uncut version of it on there. I didn't know it was on there until I started watching. I'm like, oh my gosh, it really exists. It exists. So yeah, there's cool. several shots of the topless ladies versus the edited, more friendly, I guess, from MTV. And so it's interesting that I'm like, I can't believe they're showing that on these videos. So anyway, the rest of the album is, it's got some good songs on it. Now, this was one of I saw these guys, and Whitesnake opened up for them. I think it was probably either later in the year, or it might have been even early '88 when I saw them in concert. But Whitesnake had released their Whitesnake album, and that was huge. And then these guys were running on the Girls tour, and it was an amazing concert. It really was. It was very cool. So, good stories about that one. Mm-hmm. I had a blast listening to it. I remember one night we were coming back from somewhere, and I had a cousin in town, and she had brought a friend, and there's like 5 or 6 of us I had a little, I don't even remember what car, I think it was a Mazda. And we were just cruising down the road with the radio all the way up, just screaming these songs, having a blast. So it's a good time.
Cool. Yeah, I agree.
So what is it? Is it my third pick already?
I think it's your 3.
Wow, that's good. So, what was my other? Oh, I'm gonna go with Cult. The Cult, Electric. I got turned on it. I did not even know about the Cult until a friend of mine handed me a cassette, said, listen to this tape. And I had no idea it was going to be as good as it was. And I love this album. It's got a lot of great stuff on it. And I don't think I cared for the Cult much afterwards. Some of the other stuff, there's a couple cool songs that they did. But that album, just something about it, I was able to listen to it. Every song, from beginning to end. And so that's it's a lot of fun, and it's got some good guitars in it, and I like it. What's the guy's name? Ian Astbury. His vocals are awesome too. Love Removal Machine, Wildflower, Peace Dog, all are great songs. Not a big fan of the Born to Be Wild cover though. Tim?
I got nothing.
Really?
The Cult really didn't hit my radar until the next album, Sonic Temple. And it's funny now that I'm actually solving a mystery here in my head as you're talking about this, because back then I was a teenager. I had summer jobs, and I worked with this like cool older kid who was a couple of years older than me, and he was in a band. And I was like, ooh, okay. And the name of his band was the Peace Dogs. And now I think I know where he got the name from. It was probably
There's no irony in that, right?
So, but Yeah, no, I defer. I'm going to pass the buck right over to Chris just because I don't really know anything off this album. Like I say, going forward with their next album, I know a little bit more about the Cult, but right here,
yeah, I think everybody like you, Tim. Most people didn't pick up on the Cult until 2 years later. Specifically, probably one song that was just played over and over again.
Yep.
I always thought Ian Astbury. Yeah, I always thought Ian Astbury was one of the most underrated vocalists of his era. I loved his vocals. I think he was a great singer. There are a lot of good songs on this album. A lot of good songs. Peace Dog is great. Aphrodisiac Jacket was good. I mean, there's just the Born to Be Wild cover again. It just seems like it was a cover for the sake of a cover. And there's a couple of throw-in songs here. This was a big shift for the Cult because previous to the Cult, they were just a different type of band, a different music, and like one of the hottest producers to go from hip hop to hard rock, Rick Rubin, did this album in production specifically, to make them different, and they did, and they kept on that path. It's a good album. The next album is better. I mean, I'll just say the next album is better in my estimation, but I've always had a really good spot for Ian Astbury. I always thought he was just a fantastic singer, and I thought they should have probably been bigger than they were. They just could not write a lot of good songs on one album. They always seem to have 2 or 3 good kind of catchy songs, maybe 2, and a lot of the rest just seemed like filler. So I don't know if it was just the writing or a lack of writing, but it kind of was a shame to me. Maybe Ian Astbury in a different band where he didn't sort of have to be the writer and all that stuff. It would have been worked out a little bit better. More people might know who he is, and it's kind of a shame because I thought he was great. I also thought that God, I can't remember his name now for whatever. I'm so into heavy metal. It's the lead singer for Soundgarden.
Oh,
Chris Cornell.
Chris Cornell, yeah.
Chris Cornell. Chris Cornell always kind of reminded me of a more refined Ian Astbury vocally. He sort of had a little bit of that same vocal style, and I just always like Ian Astbury. So this is a good album, Scott. It's a really good album. It just always wanted the Cult to be better, just because of, in my opinion, because of how great of a singer he was. I always wanted to be better. So I just kind of listened to their music and said, just waiting for like that really put together 10-song album where you're like, okay, now they've figured it out. And this one they didn't quite do it, but there's a start of some really good stuff here.
It's funny how different albums affect people differently. Because this one really, like, I'm looking at the song list and I'm like excited to go back and listen to it again. I'm like, I know I have it in my iTunes library. I have it on my iPod, and I know it's something I'm gonna look forward to get back into again. So anyway, let's see, who's next? Tim?
It's me, yeah, and I got about 10 albums vying for my number 3 spot. I might have to do a part 2 all by myself, where I just prattle on by myself. But I will say Great White's Once Bitten is my number 3. And one of the great mysteries in life is why I don't really like Led Zeppelin, but I love Great White. If someone can explain that to me, I'll be happy, because there's a lot of similarity.
I have no explanation for that, Tim.
Oh, yeah. You know what? You know when you make a high-pitched sound and the dog turns its head that way? Just kind of a dog will turn its head kind of sideways. From here to, I just did that when you said that. I'm like, what? How do you relate Led Zeppelin to Great White?
How? Jack Russell's voice is pretty much a dead ringer for Robert Plant a lot of times. He's an avowed Robert Plant worshiper. They even recorded an entire album of Led Zeppelin covers, and they frequently play Led Zeppelin covers live. The blues-based hard rock angle to it, I don't know. I think it's just because my older brothers tortured me with too much Led Zeppelin when I was a kid. I think I just have an aversion to them. But I found Great White on my own, let's say, and I remember buying this cassette tape, with my allowance money or whatever at the time, and this was another one like the Guns N' Roses album. This was the time when I was really getting into music on sort of a different level. I would sit there and I would listen to a complete album, and I would follow along. I would read the lyrics. I would read the liner notes, and this stuff meant something to me back then. And this, what was the big single? Rock Me was a great song. I was drawn to bass guitarists at this time. I really tried to focus on bass players, and of course, Rock Me has a great bass line to it. And there's a lot of other cool stuff on here. One of the best, in my opinion, best hard rock ballads of all time is on here. The last song, Save Your Love. Stuff in between. There's faster stuff like Fast Road, Lady Red Light. The opening track is really cool. The bluesy stuff isn't quite so pronounced. They would get a lot bluesier on their next few albums, but this one, just again, I love the way it's produced. You can hear every instrument clearly. Another album that came out this year that fits that mold is Macaulay Schenker Group's Perfect Timing, where I was really kind of just growing up a little bit in my musical taste, being able to discern things a little better, and I was starting to pay a little more attention to production. And this album was, to me, it was a complete package. It's just solid, very solid from start to finish.
Cool. It was actually, Great White has been kind of one of those bands that I always liked, and I've listened to them a lot, and I've actually seen them, I think, because they were an opening band for so many other bands. I've seen them the most in my concert going experience. Just because they were opening for, like, they opened up for they opened up for Whitesnake one year. They were at that KNEC anniversary party that I went to, and who else? Oh, they opened up for Judas Priest, my very first concert. So they were like the first big band that I ever saw in concert, to open up for Judas Priest. So I've always liked them. I've always thought they had a nice, good sound, and they had some good rockin' ones. A previous album was like, one of the songs was I Don't Want to Face the Day, or Face the Day, and that's a great song. And Rock Me, that's another good one on this one. So overall, I like this pick. And then what was the other one you mentioned?
Macaulay Schenker Group.
MSG,
I just had
MSG. That's another good album. That first song on that Give Me Your Love, I remember hearing that a lot on KNEC also, and it was always, like you said, it's very clean. I think you're right on that one. Chris, what do you think of these two?
Well, I totally agree with Tim as far as the Led Zeppelin comparison. I think they wanted to be a heavy metal Led Zeppelin in a sense. I think some of the writing a little bit, and definitely the vocals, and I think Mark Kendall kind of wanted to channel his inner Jimmy Page on a lot of licks and things, which is nothing to say is bad. I mean, who wouldn't want to? But the song Rock Me was all over the radio. It was everywhere. It's a popular album. I wasn't the hugest Great White fan. It just was a little out of my small box of music at this point in my music listening. But I mean, it was on the radio, and I would listen to it, and it was good. I can't say anything bad about them as a band. They did some great tracks. I personally kind of liked them a little better when they got bluesier down the road. Next album, a few albums later. I think that was really who they were. And I think it shows when you write better music is you write it as who you are. So you're not attempting to write songs to fit a genre that maybe you're not. That's when you start getting these filler songs, because they're just writing songs to write a song to put on an album. And later on, when you start to really find your groove and it's like, okay, who are we? Almost like Cinderella going back. You could tell who Cinderella really was about 3 or 4 albums in, not the first one. You could tell they were more blues oriented. And Great White, I think, it kind of fits that line of thought that later they sort of became the band that they became. But this album, good album. There's a couple of good songs on here. Can't say I would go back to listen to it at this point. I know my wife, when I was going over some like heavy metal in 87, because that's kind of her wheelhouse. She was about 15 at that point, 15, 16. And this was one of the ones that she remembered. She remembered that song. She remembered Rock Me, which is interesting because she's not the biggest music rememberer or anything like that, but for that to stick out for her, it was great.
One more thing about that song. When I was a DJ in college at Northern Illinois University, WKDI, I stole a record out of their cabinet. It was the Rock Me promotional vinyl single on the A side.
Awesome.
On the A side, it had the album version of the song, which is kind of long, and then on the B side, it had the half pounder version and the quarter pounder version, which were just edits.
Huh.
I just thought that was, I don't know why they made the hamburger comparison with the song Rock Me, but they did.
Neat.
Interesting. You know, I don't think there's a statute of limitations on stealing vinyl or records either. So you might, and that might come back to bite you, buddy. No. That's yeah. So let's move on. Chris, what's your third? This is your third pick, right?
This is my third pick, and I'm going with one of my favorite bands. And it was a big record for me. I love the style. I think it kicked off a style necessarily, but I'm going with Suicidal Tendencies, Join the Army. And I did join the Army, almost literally. I really loved this band. They engaged me. Things were totally different. They had a little bit of a thrash punk, but there was also some like weird parts of rap and things in there. It was very street. It was very LA street, you know. Mike Muir, I think he's an incredibly talented musician. Mayorga was a great bass player. I love the bass lines. And this album just brought me in. I listened to it front to back when I first got it and first found it. You know, Possessed to Skate, and it was kind of skateboard. It was fun. There was great songs, and it just made you want to go out and be in California and skateboard up and down the coast, and you know the skate parks and all that stuff. It just kind of screamed that punk kind of I don't care about anything LA thing, and it was just fun. It was cool, and it was something that no one was listening to, no one that I knew, but. You know, when I put it on, people were like, "Oh, that is cool. Where'd you find that?" Or "Who is that?" So this album was really cool to me. I'm very, very fond of it.
I got nothing on this because I really did not get into Suicidal Tendencies at all. But I did recognize that there was something going on in the industry there was a shift. It was like punk and metal were starting to come together and create this new sound, and this is part of it. And I think I think Rollins' band is another good example of something like that too.
Yeah, Rollins and Henry Rollins was that kind of way, and that was it was just a different genre of music. It kind of spawned, you know, later some bands in the 90s, I think, that probably grew up listening to those kind of music and took it to a different level. Mm-hmm. It sort of also became like this thrash but hardcore punk, and then later it involved like more of a rap and punk and thrash and rap thrash or whatever you want to call it. If it even has a name, I don't know. But I think this band can sort of be traced back to as the epicenter of that music, which eventually in the mid to late 90s became a pretty popular genre of music. There's a lot of bands that kind of did that stuff.
Well, I would say like Rage Against the Machine probably had a huge impact from that genre, that early on stuff.
Yeah, and they're from that area, yeah. So it makes sense that they would do that. So just a fun album. I think Limp Bizkit was probably one that kind of picked up off of that too, a little bit. So that is just, and I always like those bands. Rage Against the Machine is one of my top 5 favorite bands of all time. So you can see kind of why I like this, because that started it for me. And this is great music, really cool, really fun, great music, a little bit of edge to it underneath kind of the water, but good times.
Tim, what do you got on this one?
Nothing. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that there's actually a Suicidal Tendencies album title that's that short, Join the Army, because I know them from their stuff after this. How Will I Laugh Tomorrow When I Can't Even Smile Today, and Controlled by Hatred / Feel Like Beep ... Deja Vu, stuff like that. To me, those are Suicidal Tendencies album titles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But now here we have Join the Army. I like it. It's concise. I dig it. No, I don't. I got nothing. I mean, I know a couple of songs by these guys. I saw them when they opened for Queensryche a couple of years later. I saw them live. I just never got into the whole suicidal thing with the bandanas and wearing your shirt, the gang stuff. It just wasn't anywhere near my lifestyle or anything I knew I was comfortable with. I dug that Rocky George wore a Pittsburgh Pirates hat. That's pretty cool, but that's really about all I got.
They did have a shorter title later with Lights Camera Revolution, but then that's not in the 90s, that's in the 90s, so I can bring that up without it. Some people at that time, because they had the bandanas and the gang stuff, it was like vato metal, because it was kind of almost felt like it was like an East LA Mexican, and some of the guys did have a Latino background in the band too. So I was you're right about that. It didn't suit everybody, but the music was really good. I just loved the music.
Yeah. I did not get into that scene either. Like you saw, the vato metal. I understand it being, I was growing up in Southern California, so I understand what the movement was. That was a huge part of the music industry. It was starting to take off. So, well, we got some Twitter shout outs and some Facebook stuff to take care of real quick.
Yeah, let's go.
Not requests, but suggestions on what we were talking about, and we did bypass one that was one of the biggest sellers of the year that I don't think we're gonna have time to really dig too deep into on this one. We got Whitesnake. Maria, she adds stuff in here all the time. She chose Whitesnake, Great White Once Bitten, and Def Leppard Hysteria. So Def Leppard Hysteria, one of the biggest selling albums, does it compete with Appetite for Destruction as far as sales and popularity went, right?
Well, that's what I was looking at before we were talking about this. Again, I don't know what these things sold at the time they came out, right? But Dr. Wiki right now says that Appetite sold 18 million, so 18 times platinum. Hysteria sold 12 times platinum. And the third album I was alluding to was the Whitesnake album, because that was huge. It only sold 8 million copies, but, you can't talk about 1987 and not remember Whitesnake. Their videos were all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. You know what?
Tawny Katane was all over the place, too. That didn't hurt.
No.
Yeah. You know what? We have. I didn't expect this from 1987 when I first looked at the list, but I think we have too much to cover in one show again. We're going to have to go to two. So why don't we wrap it up for tonight, and we will talk about the Twitter and the Facebook on the next episode next week. There's still so much to cover, and I didn't realize it was going to be like that. So let's do our social media real quick. Tim, you are TSW512 at TSW512 on Twitter, right?
That is correct. Yes, or through the through the podcast page. You can find me there too.
Right, through 80's Reboot Overdrive or 80's Mixtape Auto Reverse, and then you can find me that way and Chris that way also. Chris, your Twitter is Christopher's Zen. Christopher
Zen with a Z. Yep, at Christopher Zen, and Facebook is just my name, Christopher Warren, and of course you can find on the 80's Reboot and 80's Overdrive Twitter as well, and Facebook.
And you can get me on Twitter at 80's Auto Reverse or at Scott's Eye. And so that is all for tonight. We're going to have to continue part 2 next week. Very exciting year again. It's amazing how deep we can dig into these albums. It's awesome. I'm loving every minute of it. Thank you guys, and you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll talk to you in a few days.
Fantastic.
All right, guys?
All right.
All right, bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.